Shadow Pokemon are some of the strongest Pokemon in Pokemon Go, but which Shadow Pokemon are worth investing your resources in? Well, in this video I will be going through the best Shadow Pokemon of each type as raid attackers, and I'll go through some of the best Shadow Pokemon for Go Battle League. But firstly, how do you get Shadow Pokemon, and how do you know when to purify them or keep them as Shadow Pokemon? Shadow Pokemon are obtained from Team Go Rocket Grunts, Rocket Leaders Sierra Cliff and Arlo, the Team Go Rocket boss Giovanni, and from Shadow Raids. Shadow Pokemon come with the pretty useless charge attack Frustration that can't be removed by a charge TM except during specific Team Go Rocket focused events. Once caught, you do have the option to purify the Shadow Pokemon, which will reduce the amount of Candy, Candy XL and Stardust required to power them up. Purification also adds 2 IVs to each stat, and it gives you the exclusive charge attack Return. However, for the most part, you actually don't want to purify your Shadow Pokemon. You see, despite these benefits of purification, Pokemon are, for the most part, much better in their Shadow form. Shadow Pokemon do 20% more damage than regular and purified Pokemon. This means when it comes to raid battles that do require you to beat the raid boss in a time limit, Shadow Pokemon that have higher damage per second are preferred. However, Shadow Pokemon do have a drawback. As well as the 20% increased damage they get, they also take 20% more damage. This means that as well as having a higher DPS, they also have a lower total damage output, which is the amount of damage a Pokemon can do before being knocked out. But in a raid setting, this drawback isn't major because you want as much damage as you can as quickly as you can. This means that as a raid attacker, a Pokemon is pretty much always better in its Shadow form. But there are some cases where you will want to purify your Shadow Pokemon. For example, if you collect Hundos, the +2 IVs to each stat can sometimes help you reach that, but this is only for collection purposes because a 0% IV Shadow Pokemon will actually deal more damage than a 100% IV purified Pokemon. This is because the difference between a Nundo and a Hundo in terms of stats is around 10%, so a Hundo will do around 10% more damage than a Nundo, but a Shadow Pokemon does 20% more damage, meaning that a Nundo Shadow Pokemon will do more damage than a Hundo non-Shadow Pokemon. Additionally, you may want to purify Pokemon to work on your purified decks if that aspect of the game interests you. And when it comes to PvP, whether to purify or not becomes less clear cut. There are some Pokemon that actually benefit from purification in a PvP setting, like Sableye for example. Sableye in the Great League is better in its purified form because once it is purified, it gets access to the normal type charge attack Return, which can't be obtained any other way, and this happens to be one of the moves that it needs to become even better in PvP. Additionally, sometimes when you have a particularly defense and HP weighted Pokemon, being in its Shadow form will actually make it worse. This is because the 20% increased damage doesn't do much for it because its base attack stat isn't very good in the first place, but the main problem is the fact it will take 20% more damage in its Shadow form. So for a defensive Pokemon, being in its Shadow form is actually making it less effective at being defensive. This happens in a lot of cases in Go Battle League, and an example of this would be Bastiodon. For these kinds of situations, the non-Shadow version of the Pokemon will be better. But note that in most cases you want the regular Pokemon and not the purified form, because in PvP for capped CP leagues, you generally want low attack IV and high defense and high HP IVs. The problem with purification is that it will add 2 IVs to each of the stats, and you might not want that for the attack stat. Another reason you may want to purify a Shadow Pokemon is if it has a decent Mega Evolution, because you can't Mega Evolve a Shadow Pokemon. With the +2 IVs to each stat, purifying could be a good way to get a Hundo Mega Pokemon. Also, if you are working on your Platinum Purifier medal, you may want to purify some Shadow Pokemon that require a low amount of Candy or Stardust to do so, like Starly or Zubat for example. Leveling up your Purifier medal increases the amount of Premier Balls you get to catch a Shadow Pokemon, and you do need 35 Platinum medals for the level 49 requirements, so this could be a good one to get. With all of this said, let's take a look at which Shadow Pokemon are the best for raid attacking. So starting with Shadow Mewtwo, which is actually one of the best Pokemon in the game. It has the highest damage of any Shadow Pokemon in the game, and it only falls short to Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre and Mega Rayquaza. It has higher DPS than Primal Groudon and Kyogre, but being a Shadow, its TDO is quite a bit lower because it does take more damage. Either way, if you don't have a Shadow Mewtwo yet, you should prioritize it when it returns to the game. It has been available in the past from Giovanni and in Shadow Raids, and being a fan favourite, it is sure to return at some point. Its best moveset is Confuse Confusion and Psystrike, with Psycho Cut and Psystrike being very close behind. It's good to note though that Psystrike is a legacy move, so it will require an elite TM to get. Shadow Mewtwo is also very versatile as a raid attacker because it does have access to moves like Ice Beam, Thunderbolt and Shadow Ball, making it a strong attacker of those types as well. Additionally, Shadow Mewtwo is a strong Pokemon in the Master League as well. The next Shadow Pokemon I would like to talk about is Shadow Metagross. This is the best Steel type raid attacker with Bullet Punch and Meteor Mash, and it will only be outclassed by Mega Metagross in the future. Again, Meteor Mash is a legacy move that will require an elite TM to get. Sometimes you can get Meteor Mash during certain special events, so I would recommend keeping any Shadow Beldum you have, remove Frustration when you get the chance in a Team Go Rocket event, then wait to evolve it to Metagross when Meteor Mash is available via evolution. Meteor Mash was first made available during Beldum Community Day, and I'm pretty sure there will be a Beldum Community Day Classic coming up in the future, so you'll most likely be able to get the move then. Next up is Shadow Rampardos. This Pokemon is well worth investing in because it is the highest DPS Rock type raid attacker, and the second best overall Shadow Pokemon currently in the game. This means it is a must-have for raid attacking, especially as there are a lot of legendary Pokemon that are weak to Rock. The optimal moveset is Smackdown and Rock Slide. Another very important Shadow Rock type raid attacker is Shadow Rhyperior, which is considered a better Rock type raid attacker than Shadow Rampardos because it has a much higher TDO but slightly lower DPS. Either way, both Shadow Rampardos and Rhyperior are worth investing in. Other than the higher DPS, another advantage for Rampardos is that the optimal moveset is accessible without an elite TM or a special event. However, Shadow Rhyperior's best moveset is Smackdown and Rock Wrecker, with Rock Wrecker only being accessible through elite TMs and maybe special events. In terms of Dragon raid attackers, Shadow Salamence with Dragon Tail and Outrage is the best in terms of raid attacking, so I would recommend going for it if you can. But again, Outrage is a legacy move for Salamence, so it will require an elite TM. This means it might be worth going for Shadow Garchomp instead, which is close to Shadow Salamence in terms of DPS, and it uses the same moveset, but Outrage isn't a legacy move for Garchomp, so you can get it through normal means. It is good to note here as well that Shadow Dragonite with the same moveset is almost as good as Shadow Garchomp and Salamence, and it again can get Outrage without an elite TM. Shadow Dragonite also has the advantage of that it is better in PvP than the other two as well, so it's definitely a worthwhile investment. Shadow Garchomp does also double up as the best ground type raid attacker with Mudshot and Earth Power, but Earth Power is a legacy move and therefore less accessible, so another option for a Shadow ground attacker could be Shadow Excadrill. This Pokemon is very close to Shadow Garchomp in terms of its performance, and it doesn't require legacy moves, with its moveset being Mud Slap and Scorching Sands, which are both readily available. For Ghosts, Shadow Gengar and Chandelure are both great options, being very comparable in terms of their raid attacking performances. Shadow Gengar also doubles up as the best Shadow Poison type raid attacker with Sludge Bomb, and Shadow Chandelure doubles up as a powerful Fire type raid attacker comparable to Shadow Blaziken, which is the best non-legendary Shadow Fire type. However, for Shadow Fire type raid attackers, Shadow Entei is at the top when you take into account DPS and TDO. Shadow Apex Ho-Oh and Shadow Moltres are very close behind. These are all great options. However, Shadow Apex Ho-Oh has only been available once from a Masterwork research from Johto Tour, and it's not clear if it will return in the future. Shadow Tyranitar is the best Shadow Dark type raid attacker with Bite and Brutal Swing, so it's very much worth investment. It can also double up as one of the best Shadow Rock type raid attackers, but it's not as good as Shadow Rampardos and Rhyperior that I mentioned earlier. Moving on to the flying type raid attackers, Shadow Moltres is at the top here with Wing Attack and Sky Attack, but if you do have Rayquaza or Mega Rayquaza, it is a lower priority in terms of investment, especially as the flying type is not one of the most useful types in the meta. Shadow Raikou with Thundershock and Wild Charge is the best Shadow raid attacker for the electric types, and it's very likely it will be released in Shadow raids in the future, so well worth picking up when you can. If you don't have access to Shadow Raikou yet, then a more accessible Pokemon that is the second best electric type Shadow raid attacker is Shadow Electivire with the same moveset as Raikou. For the ice types, Shadow Mamoswine with Powder Snow and Avalanche is the top overall ice type raid attacker, and Shadow Weavile is a close second, so both of these Pokemon are great options. Ice attackers have a strong presence in the meta with a high amount of dragon and flying legendary Pokemon. When it comes to grass types, there aren't many great options, but Shadow Tangrowth is the best Shadow grass attacker we currently have. However, with grass types not being very meta relevant, it isn't really worth investing much in. Likewise, bugs don't see a lot of play in the meta when it comes to raid attacking, but Shadow Pinsir with Bug Bite and X Scissor and Shadow Scizor with Fury Cutter and X Scissor are the best to go for. For water types, Shadow Swampert with Water Gun and legacy move Hydro Cannon will be your best option, and it also has a lot of use in PvP as well. Hydro Cannon is the Community Day move for Swampert, and it is possible the move will become available via evolution again in the future, but it is unclear if or when that will happen. happen. As it is useful in PvP as well, Hydro Cannon might be worth an elite TM on Swampert if you have a good one with good PvP IVs. For the fairy types, Shadow Gardevoir with Charm and Dazzling Gleam is the best Shadow Fairy type raid attacker, and overall only second to Mega Gardevoir. Another option could be Shadow Gramble with Charm and Play Rough, but I would recommend investing in Shadow Gardevoir if you can. In terms of fighting type raid attackers, Shadow Machamp with Counter and Dynamic Punch is the go-to and the only one you should be investing in really. It does lose out to Pokemon like Terrakion, Keldeo and Mega Blaziken, but it is generally more accessible and requires no legacy moves. Additionally, it is a good Pokemon for the Go Battle League as well. And lastly, with normal types not being able to deal super effective damage, they don't really have a place in the raid attacking meta, but it's good to note that Shadow Regigigas is the best here, but not really worth investing in. So these are the best Shadow Pokemon for raid attacking. Let's take a look at some of the best Shadow Pokemon for each of the main Go Battle Leagues. So starting with the Great League, some of the most notable Shadow Pokemon are Shadow Gligar, Swampert, Poliwrath, Whiscash, Machamp, Quagsire, Steelix, Gliscor, Alolan Ninetales, and Hitmontop. For the Ultra League, the notable Shadow Pokemon are Steelix, Registeel, Regirock, Swampert, Poliwrath, Gliscor, Walrein, Sneasler, Dragonite, and Abomasnow. And for the Master League, we have Dragonite, Mewtwo, Gyarados, Snorlax, Apex Ho-Oh, Ursaluna, Apex Lugia, Mamoswine, Latios, and Zapdos. It's good to note here that the perfect PvP IVs for Pokemon depend on their max CP and the max CP cap of the league. For the Master League, where there is no CP cap, the perfect PvP IVs are Hundo IVs of 15, 15, 15. As I mentioned previously, whether a Pokemon is better as a Shadow, Purified, or in its regular form in PvP is less clear cut than it is with raid attacking, so it's worth using online resources like PvPoke to check them out first before you invest in them. So let me know which Shadow Pokemon you tend to use in raids and in PvP, and if I've missed any particular useful Shadow Pokemon, feel free to comment them below. So check out this video on the screen now, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.